Welcome. Tonight we are going to talk about water. Not water as a symbol, water as a teacher. There is an ancient idea, one of the oldest the human mind has ever held, that the most effortless thing in the world is also the most unstoppable. That the river does not force its way to the sea, it simply finds it. And tonight, we are going to follow that river together. We are going to let go of forcing and see what finds us when we do. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. You do not need to know anything about Taoism to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever felt the exhaustion of pushing too hard against life and wondered if there was a gentler way to carry it. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. There is a book so old that no one can say exactly when it was written. It is called the Tao Te Ching, known in the West as the Tao Te Ching. It was composed, it is said, by a man named Lao Tzu, known in the West as Lao Tzu. A keeper of archives, a quiet man, a man who, near the end of his life, rode out of the city on a water buffalo and disappeared into the mountains. Before he left, someone asked him to write down what he knew. He wrote 81 short passages, each one like a stone dropped in still water, each one still sending ripples outward, 2,500 years later. The central teaching of the Tao Te Ching is this, that there is a way things naturally want to move, a way water wants to flow, a way seeds want to open, a way breath wants to move through a body that has finally stopped holding itself tight. And when we align ourselves with that natural movement, when we stop forcing and start following, we do not become passive. We become, in the deepest sense, free. This is not a teaching about giving up. It is a teaching about a different kind of strength, one that does not announce itself, one that does not need to win every argument with the world in order to move forward. That is tonight's first lesson. The river does not hurry, and yet it reaches the sea. There was once a young man who wanted to be a great calligrapher. He was not yet great, but he was very determined. He had studied under 3 different teachers already. Each one had given him rules. Hold the brush this way, breathe on this count, picture the stroke fully before you make it. He had followed every rule precisely. None of it had helped. Every morning before sunrise, he lit his lamp and sat at his table. He dipped his brush in ink. He breathed. He tried to make the perfect stroke. The stroke never came out as he imagined it. The line trembled. The curve refused. He pressed harder. He pressed harder still. He heard that a great master lived 3 days' walk to the north, in a village at the edge of a cedar forest. So the young man packed his brushes and his ink and walked the 3 days. When he arrived, he found the master sitting by a river, doing nothing at all. The master was old. His hands rested in his lap. His eyes were half closed. He was watching the water. "Teacher," the young man said, "I have come to learn the secret of perfect calligraphy." The master said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled, very slowly. "Sit," the master said. The young man sat beside him on the river bank. They watched the water together. The river was not in a hurry. It moved around a large stone near the bank. It did not smash against the stone. It did not go backward. It simply found a space on either side and continued on its way. After some time, the master spoke. "How do you hold your brush?" he asked. "Firmly," the young man said. "I hold it firmly so that it does not slip." "Show me your hand," the master said. The young man opened his hand. There were marks in his palm from where he had gripped the brush handle so tightly day after day. The master looked at the marks for a long time. "The river," the master said at last, "does not grip the stone." The young man looked at the water. He watched it move around the stone, easy, unhurried, finding the opening that was already there. "But what if a stroke goes wrong?" the young man asked. "Then it goes wrong," the master said, "and the next stroke comes." The young man was quiet. "You are not trying to make a beautiful line," the master said. "You are trying to control what the line will say about you. That is a different thing entirely." The young man felt something loosen in his chest. He had not known he was carrying that. "If the line trembles," the master said, "perhaps the trembling is honest. Perhaps the trembling is what the line wanted to say." They sat together a while longer, watching the river. Then the master picked up a stick from the ground. He dipped it in the muddy riverbank, and without looking, without pausing, without any visible effort at all, he drew a single sweeping curve on a flat stone. It was the most beautiful thing the young man had ever seen. "How did you do that?" the young man asked. "You didn't even try." "I did try," the master said, "but I did not push. There is a difference between trying and pushing. Trying is opening your hand. Pushing is closing your fist." The young man walked home. He did not try to do anything differently. He simply noticed over the following weeks that his grip had loosened, that his lines were breathing, that something was moving through the brush that had not been able to move before. He never became famous, but every person who ever received a letter written by his hand felt somehow that it had been written just for them. They could not explain why. There was nothing technically extraordinary about the strokes, but something in the unhurried, unguarded shape of his writing made the reader feel for a moment fully seen. In the Sufi tradition of Islamic mysticism, there is a similar understanding. The great poet Rumi, who wrote in the 13th century, spoke often of the reed flute. In his most famous poem, he describes a flute cut from a reed bed. The flute weeps for the river it was separated from. And through that wound, through that hollow emptiness, music pours. Rumi was saying something that Taoists would have recognized immediately, that the hollow places in us are not failures. They are the openings through which something larger can move. The flute does not make music by forcing air in one direction. It makes music by being open, by allowing the breath to find its own path through the hollow. There is a phrase sometimes used in Sufi teaching, Die before you die. Not a literal death, but a loosening of the grip on the self that controls, calculates, and forces. A willingness to become hollow enough that something larger can pass through. This is what the Taoists call Wu Wei, the effortless way. What the Sufis call Fana, the dissolving. Different words, the same opening of the hand, the same trust that the breath knows where it wants to go. Tonight, you are the flute, not empty, full of music waiting for the right kind of opening. Rumi himself was no stranger to the calligrapher's predicament. He wrote thousands of verses, and by all accounts, the greatest of them did not arrive through careful planning. They arrived while he was spinning in the practice that would later be called the whirling of the dervishes. Turning, turning, until the turning itself became a kind of opened hand, and the poems simply moved through him as the river moves around the stone. Think about a moment when you were trying very hard to fall asleep. You may have felt this yourself. The harder you tried, the further away sleep felt. You watched the clock. You calculated how many hours remained. You told yourself to relax, which only made you tense. That is the young man gripping his brush. Sleep, like the perfect calligraphy stroke, cannot be forced. It can only be invited. It comes when you stop reaching for it. This shows up in ordinary life, too. In the conversation you rehearsed all day, and then the moment arrived and you forgot everything you had prepared. Or the idea you chased for weeks and then found it while washing the dishes when you had stopped looking. The Taoist teaching is not that you should stop caring. It is that caring and gripping are not the same thing. You can want something and still hold it lightly. Right now, in this breath, you are already doing it. You are not forcing yourself to fall asleep. You are simply lying here, listening, letting the words come to you, letting the breath come and go without being instructed. That is it. That is the whole teaching, already happening. Right now, let yourself feel what it is like to not be pushing anything, not one single thing, just this. There is nowhere you need to arrive tonight. There is no version of this listening you are failing to do correctly. The young man's brush did not know it was being judged. It only knew the page and the ink and the unhurried hand above it. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote something very strange in the Tao Te Ching. He wrote that the usefulness of a wheel comes from the empty space at its center, that the usefulness of a cup comes from the hollow inside it, that the usefulness of a room comes from the space the walls enclose, not the walls themselves. This is not a puzzle. It is a direct observation. We tend to think of value as something solid, something we can point to, something we have built up. But Lao Tzu is asking us to consider the other kind of value, the value of nothing. The resting place between two notes is what makes the music. The pause between two thoughts is where insight arrives. The space between two words is where the listener really hears. Tonight's second teaching is this: the empty place is not the absence of something. It is the necessary condition for everything. We are not used to thinking this way. We are used to measuring a life by what fills it. But every musician knows that the silence between notes is not a gap in the music. It is part of the music. Without it, there is only noise. There was a woman who had spent her whole life filling things up. Her shelves were full of books she had not read. Her calendar was full of appointments she did not want. Her mind was full of plans, half-plans, old arguments, and future worries. She was not unhappy exactly. She was just very, very tired. She had once tried to explain this tiredness to a friend, and had heard herself say something that surprised her. "I feel like I am always arriving somewhere just after the good part has already finished." She had not known what she meant by it until much later. One autumn she travelled to visit her grandmother, who lived alone in a small house at the edge of a slow-moving marsh. The grandmother's house was nearly empty. A bed, a chair, a table, a single window that looked out over the water. "Grandmother," the woman said, "don't you get lonely with so little?" The grandmother looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Lonely?" she said. "No," she smiled a little. "I used to live like you do, very full, so full there was no room for anything to visit." "What do you mean?" the woman asked. "Sit down," the grandmother said. "Just sit. Don't do anything for a moment." The woman sat in the chair by the window. She looked out at the marsh. A heron was standing very still in the shallow water. She waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. After a while, she noticed the light on the water, the way it shifted, the way the heron tilted its head without moving the rest of its body, the sound of wind through the reeds, a long, papery sound, like someone turning pages in another room. She sat for a long time. When she finally stood up, she felt different. She could not have said exactly how. "What visited you?" her grandmother asked. The woman thought. "I think I visited myself," she said. The grandmother nodded. "When every corner is full," the grandmother said, "there is no room for you to arrive. You spend all your time maintaining what you have collected, and you never get to simply be in the space." The woman looked around the small room, the bare walls, the single window, the light coming in. "Isn't it frightening?" she asked. "Being so empty?" "It was at first," the grandmother said. "I thought I was disappearing. I was wrong. I was just making room." The woman returned to her own house. She did not throw everything away. She was not a dramatic person. But she found, over the following months, that she began to let things leave when they were ready to leave. She did not replace them all. She let the spaces stay open. She let them breathe. And she found, as her grandmother had said, that things came to visit in those spaces, quiet thoughts, old memories she had been too busy to greet, a kind of ease she had not felt since she was a child. Once, sitting in her newly quiet living room, she felt something she could only describe as fullness, deep, uncomplicated fullness. It was the strangest thing. The emptier her life became, the more she felt she had. Years later, when her own granddaughter asked her the same question she had once asked, "Don't you get lonely with so little?" she found herself smiling the exact smile she remembered from that small house by the marsh. She had not planned to inherit it. It had simply arrived, the way the heron's stillness had arrived, the way everything true seemed to arrive, quietly, and only once there was room. In the Native American traditions of many nations, there is a similar understanding of sacred space. Among the Lakota people, there is a concept sometimes translated as the Great Silence, a stillness that is understood not as absence, but as presence, the silence before the ceremony begins. The silence after the final drumbeat fades. These silences are treated as living things. A Lakota elder once described it this way: "Before you speak truth, you must make room for it. If your mouth is already full of words, where will truth go?" This is not an invitation to never speak. It is an understanding that speaking and silence are partners, that the word carries weight because of the emptiness around it. In many indigenous traditions, the direction of the west, where the sun goes down, where the day empties itself, is considered sacred. Not because of what it contains, but because of what it releases. The west is the direction of letting go. Tonight, right now, you are moving into the west of your day. The sun has gone down. The light has emptied itself from the sky. And in that emptiness, something is waiting. Not something you need to find, something that finds you when there is room. There is a related practice among many Plains nations called the Vision Quest, a period of solitude and fasting, deliberately stripped of distraction, undertaken precisely so that something larger than the daily noise of living might finally have room to speak. You may have felt this yourself when you arrived home after a long day and found you could not stop moving. You kept checking things, doing small tasks, filling the silence with sounds or screens, not out of need, out of habit, out of a vague fear of what the silence might say. This shows up in the mind at night, too. When the body lies down, but the mind keeps running, keeps filling, keeps managing and planning and reviewing. The Taoist teaching and the teaching of that grandmother by the marsh is not that you should force your mind to go quiet. It is that you might allow a little empty space to appear. Just a little, just this breath. Just this moment between one thought and the next. Think about what it would feel like to need nothing right now. Not to be healed or fixed or improved. Just to be lying here in this moment, which already contains everything you need. The empty space is not the absence of you. It is the room you have made for yourself to finally arrive. Right now, in this breath, you have arrived. Feel what that is like. Not a thought about it, the actual feeling. Something quieter than thought. Something already there. You do not have to fill this moment with anything. Not a plan for tomorrow. Not a worry from today. Just the room itself. And you, resting easily inside it. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu had a great love for trees, not the grand, unyielding ones, the ones that bent. He wrote that the willow survives the storm because it moves with the wind. The old oak may resist, and the old oak may fall, but the willow sways and sways and is still there in the morning. He was not praising weakness. He was observing something deeper. That true strength is not rigidity. True strength is the capacity to move without breaking. We learn this slowly, most of us. We spend many years believing that the hard, unyielding response is the strong one, that to bend is to lose, that to adapt is to surrender. But Lao Tzu, watching the willows along the river, knew something different. He knew that the thing that lasts is never the most rigid thing. It is the most responsive. Tonight, that is what we are here to feel together. Not stiffness, responsiveness, not resistance, the capacity to sway. This is harder to trust than it sounds. Rigidity feels, in the moment, like control. But control and endurance are not the same thing, and only one of them survives the season. There was a young soldier who came back from the wars changed. He did not speak about what had happened. He sat very upright. He held himself very still. He had learned in the war that stillness was safety, that the rigid body was the defended body. He returned to his village and tried to live as he had before, but he found he could not. He startled at sounds. He slept badly. He held his breath without realizing it. His mother watched him and said nothing. She was a patient woman. She had buried a husband and raised 3 children alone, and she had learned long ago that the things that mattered most could rarely be reached by speaking directly at them. They had to be approached sideways, the way you might approach a frightened animal. One spring morning, she asked him to help her in the garden. He expected digging, hard work, something to exhaust himself against. Instead, she handed him a thin bamboo shoot she was trying to train up a fence. "Hold this," she said. "Here, gently, just guide it." He took the bamboo. It was flexible in his hand, impossibly thin. It bent easily in any direction. "It's too soft," he said. "It won't survive the summer storms." "Come back in the autumn," his mother said, smiling. "We'll see." He began spending his mornings in the garden. He learned to work with the bamboo shoots rather than against them. He learned that you could not force a plant in a direction it did not want to grow. You could only create conditions and then encourage. Some mornings he arrived to find the shoots had bent themselves overnight into shapes he had not intended. He used to straighten them. Then he stopped. He began to see that the bent shape was often stronger than the straight one. The curve distributed weight more evenly. The angle allowed light in from unexpected directions. Autumn came. A storm came with it. Every rigid stake in the garden snapped. The young soldier stood in the garden the morning after and counted what had fallen. The bamboo shoots were all still there, bent, some of them, some leaning at odd angles, but alive. His mother came out and stood beside him. "I think I have been a stake," he said at last. "I know," she said, "but you are becoming bamboo." He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know a person could learn that," he said. "Everything learns it eventually," she said. "Some things just need a garden." He tended that garden for the rest of his long life. He was not a gentleman exactly. Gentleness is a different thing. But he was a responsive man. He learned to feel which way the wind was moving before it arrived. He learned to soften his stance without losing his footing. People said he was a wise man. He always denied it. "I'm just bamboo," he would say. And he would smile a private smile that no one quite understood. Once, near the end of his life, a young soldier returning from a different war came to that same garden, having heard there was a man there who understood something about coming home. The old man did not give him any advice. He simply handed him a thin green shoot and asked him to hold it, gently, just to guide it. In the Stoic tradition of ancient Greece and Rome, there is a similar understanding, though it comes from a different angle. The Stoic philosophers, men like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, spoke often of the dichotomy of control. The understanding that some things are within our power and some things are not, and that wisdom is knowing the difference. Epictetus, who had been a slave, wrote that no one can take your inner freedom unless you hand it over. The body can be constrained. The mind cannot unless it insists on fighting what cannot be fought. Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor and never free of difficulties, wrote in his private journal, "The obstacle is the way." He did not mean that obstacles should be wished away. He meant that the response to the obstacle, the bending, the adapting, the finding of what can still be done, is itself the path forward. This is remarkably close to Lao Tzu's willow. The Stoic does not celebrate suffering. They celebrate what remains possible when we stop fighting what cannot be changed. The range of motion that opens up when the rigid stance is released. Both traditions are saying there is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It is the strength of the thing that bends and is still here in the morning. Epictetus taught his students a simple daily practice: to ask of every difficulty, which part of this is within my control and which part is not. Most distress, he found, comes from spending all of our strength on the second category and none on the first. Think about a moment when you were certain that a thing had to go one particular way. You may have felt this yourself, the absolute clarity that this conversation, this plan, this relationship, this project had to resolve in a specific shape. And when it did not, the collapse that followed felt like failure. But what if the collapse was the storm? And what if you, by finding the new angle, the unexpected curve, the shape you had not planned, became bamboo? This shows up in ordinary life in small ways and large ones. The route that was closed and the discovery made on the detour. The relationship that ended and the space that opened afterward. The career that did not work out, and the unexpected door it nudged open. You cannot know in advance which bends were gifts. You can only notice, looking back, that some of your most rigid certainties, the ones you held most tightly, turned out to be the most limiting ones. Right now, in this breath, you do not have to be anything at all. You can be soft. You can be flexible. You can let this moment be exactly the shape it is, without insisting it be different. Feel what it is like to stop insisting. Even for just this breath, the grip loosens, the heaviness lifts, the mind grows still. There is nothing you need to hold rigid tonight, not your posture, not your thoughts, not the shape of tomorrow. Just let yourself be exactly as soft as you already are. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. In the Tao Te Ching, there is a passage about valleys. Lao Tzu says that the valley spirit never dies. He is talking about the low place, the humble place, the place where water collects because it has no ambition to be a mountain. This is one of the oldest and most counterintuitive teachings in human history, that the lower place is the more powerful one, that the diminished, the receptive, the quietly present, these are not signs of defeat. They are the conditions of abundance. We live in a world that celebrates height, elevation, visibility, growth. But the Taoist teacher watches the valley. The valley receives what the mountain cannot hold. The mountain is impressive. The valley feeds people. Tonight's fourth teaching is about the virtue of smallness, not shrinking, not disappearing, the particular power of the one who does not demand to be large, the particular freedom of the person who has stopped trying to be a mountain and has learned to be a valley. A valley does not announce itself. It does not compete for attention with the peaks around it, and yet every river eventually finds its way down into one. There was a village baker who made bread so good that people walked for 3 days to taste it. She was not famous. She was not celebrated. She did not travel. She did not teach. She simply made bread. Kings had sent emissaries to ask her to bake for royal tables in distant cities. She had declined every time, without much explanation. People found this strange at all. Every morning, very early, before anyone was awake, she lit the oven. She mixed the flour. She felt the dough between her hands and knew, without measuring, whether it needed more water or more time, or simply to be left alone. A young man arrived one day. He had walked 3 days. He wanted to learn to bake as she did. She put him to work immediately. He was enthusiastic. He worked hard. He measured everything carefully. He tried to do everything she did in exactly the order she did it. The bread was fine. It was good bread, but it was not her bread. After a week, he came to her in the evening. "I have done everything you do," he said. "I have watched every step, but my bread is different. What am I missing?" The baker wiped her hands on her apron. "What were you thinking about this morning when you mixed the dough?" she asked. He thought about it. "I was thinking about what I was doing wrong yesterday, and whether I would do it right today." She nodded slowly. "When I mix the dough," she said, "I am not thinking about yesterday's bread or tomorrow's bread. I am thinking about this dough." She paused. "Not even thinking, I am listening." "Listening for what?" She smiled. "For what the dough needs. Every batch is different. Different weather, different flour, different morning. The dough tells me, but I have to be quiet enough to hear it." The young man was silent. "You are trying to make great bread," she said. "I am just making bread. The greatness, if it is there, takes care of itself." He stayed for another month. He began to notice that the baker never seemed to be working very hard. She moved slowly, deliberately, without hurry. She did not check her bread anxiously. She trusted it. He began to understand that what he had mistaken for skill was something older than skill. It was a kind of listening, a willingness to be instructed by what was in front of you rather than what you expected. On his last morning, she gave him a small, warm loaf to carry home. "When you bake at home," she said, "do not try to make my bread. Make your bread. Listen to your dough. Yours will be different, but it will be true." He carried the loaf for 3 days. When he finally reached home, the bread was cold. But when he broke it and tasted it, he still found something in it he could not name, something that had been baked in. He stood in his own kitchen and he listened. He never became as famous as she was. He never wanted to be. He spent the rest of his life baking small loaves for a small village, and on certain mornings kneading the dough in the grey light before dawn. He understood exactly why she had turned away the kings. In the Hindu philosophical tradition, there is a teaching that points to the same truth. The Bhagavad Gita, one of the most revered texts in the world, contains a teaching that has shaped many millions of lives. It is the teaching of nishkama karma, action without attachment to outcome, doing the work without clinging to the fruit of the work. The god Krishna says to the warrior Arjuna, "You have a right to perform your actions, but not to the fruits of those actions. Let not the fruits of action be your motive. This is not a counsel of indifference. It is a counsel of presence. When you are attached to the result, when you are constantly measuring whether the bread is as good as it should be, whether you are performing as well as you should, you are not fully in the action. You are somewhere else. In the future, judging. In the past, regretting." The baker knew something that Arjuna needed to learn, that the bread made in full presence, with no thought of reputation or comparison or outcome, is the bread that feeds something deeper than hunger. And it is the bread that somehow always turns out right. This teaching does not ask you to stop caring about the quality of what you make. It asks you to let the caring live in the doing, rather than in the anxious watching of the doing from somewhere outside it. Think about the last time you did something simply because you loved doing it, with no audience, no measure, no performance. Maybe it was a long time ago. Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it is the kind of thing you used to do before life got complicated. You may have felt this yourself, the strange freedom of the task done for its own sake. The garden tended with no thought of who would see it. The song hummed in an empty house. The walk taken with nowhere in particular to go. This shows up in ordinary life when we let ourselves be small, when we stop needing to be the mountain and let ourselves be the valley, when we stop performing and simply do, not because ambition is wrong, not because it doesn't matter, but because the bread made with full presence is different from the bread made for applause. Right now, in this moment, no one is watching you sleep. There is no performance required. There is nothing to measure. You are just here, just a person in a bed, just breathing. That smallness, that ordinariness, is not a compromise. It is freedom. Let yourself be ordinary for a moment. Let it be enough. Something deeper. Something quieter. Already here. You do not have to perform rest the way the young apprentice once tried to perform good bread. You simply have to lie here, ordinary and unwatched, and let this be enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. There is a teaching, very old, that begins with a single observation about suffering. Not suffering as punishment, suffering as friction. The Buddha called it dukkha, a word that is hard to translate, sometimes rendered as suffering, sometimes as dissatisfaction, sometimes more simply as the sense that something is slightly out of joint. He taught that this friction comes from one place above all others, clinging, the tightening of the hand around something that was always going to change, not the having, the clinging. You can hold a leaf in an open palm and watch the wind take it, and there is no suffering in that. You can hold the same leaf in a closed fist, refusing the wind, and the suffering begins immediately. Not because the leaf is gone, but because you decided it should stay. This is close to what Lao Tzu meant by wu-wei, not different from it, a second name for the same gate. Tonight's teaching is this: most of what weighs on you is not the thing itself, it is the grip. There was a potter who made bowls of such beauty that travellers came from distant provinces simply to hold one. He did not sell many of them. Most he gave away. But there was one bowl, the first one he had ever made, that satisfied him completely, that he kept on a shelf in his workshop and never let anyone touch. It was not the most beautiful bowl he had made. By his own admission, later bowls were finer, but it was the first one that had felt, in his hands, like something more than clay. And so he had decided, without quite deciding, that it could never be replaced. For 20 years he dusted that shelf himself. He would not let his apprentices near it. He told himself this was reverence. He did not examine very often whether it might also be fear. There were mornings when he stood before the bowl and felt a strange tightness in his chest, almost like grief, though nothing had happened yet. He thought this was simply what it meant to love something precious. He did not yet understand that it was the particular grief of a man bracing every single day for a loss that had not occurred. A young apprentice came to study with him. She was talented and quick and eager to understand not just his technique, but the quiet stillness he carried while he worked. She noticed in her first weeks that his stillness had a single crack in it. Whenever she dusted near that one shelf, something in his shoulders changed. He never said anything, but she felt it, the way you feel a held breath in a room before anyone tells you to be quiet. One morning, dusting the shelf, she knocked the old bowl to the floor. It did not shatter completely. It cracked into several large pieces, clean breaks, the kind that could almost be repaired. She stood frozen, waiting for his anger. The potter walked over. He looked at the pieces for a long moment. His face did not change in the way she expected. He picked up the largest piece and turned it over in his hands. "I have been afraid of this for 20 years, he said, almost to himself. "I am so sorry," she said. "I'll replace it. I'll make you a new one, finer, I promise." "No," he said, and he smiled, though it was a strange, tired sort of smile. "You can't replace it. That's exactly the trouble." He sat down on his stool, holding the broken pieces in his lap. "Do you know why I never let anyone touch this bowl?" he asked. She shook her head. "Because the day I made it, I was a different man. My father had just died. My hands were shaking. I made this bowl not knowing if I would ever make another one worth keeping." He turned the largest shard so the light caught the glaze. "I decided this bowl was the proof that I could still create something whole, even while I was breaking." "And now it's broken too," she said quietly. "Now it's broken too." He agreed. They sat together in the workshop for a long while. Outside, the sound of the village going about its morning drifted in through the open door. "I think," the potter said slowly, "that I have spent 20 years protecting a proof I no longer needed. I already know I can create something whole. I have made 1,000 bowls since this one. The proof was never in the bowl. It was in the making." He sat with that thought for a while, turning it over the way he might have turned a piece of unfinished clay. "Do you know what is strange?" he said. "I have not been afraid of this bowl breaking. I have been afraid of finding out that I would survive it. As long as it stayed whole, I never had to discover whether I still needed it." The apprentice did not fully understand this, but she sensed it was important, and she stayed quiet and let him keep speaking. 20 years, he said again, almost wonderingly. 20 years of arranging my whole workshop around the absence of this one event. And now the event has happened, and I am still here. The sky has not changed. He set the broken pieces on his workbench. "There is a practice," he said, "where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks are not hidden. They are filled with lacquer mixed with gold dust, so the breakage becomes part of the object's history rather than a flaw to be disguised." He looked at the apprentice. "Will you help me?" he asked. "I have never had the courage to do this with this particular bowl. Perhaps it needed to break before I could let it be mended differently." They worked together for the rest of the morning, fitting the pieces, preparing the gold lacquer, rejoining what had been one whole and was now, in a sense, a different and equally whole thing. When it was finished, the cracks ran through the bowl like rivers of light. The potter placed it back on the shelf, but this time he did not forbid anyone from touching it. "It's stronger now," the apprentice said, surprised. "At the seams." "Yes," the potter said, "that is often how it goes." In the Hasidic tradition of Eastern European Judaism, there is a teaching that speaks to this same broken wholeness. The Hasidic masters told a story about creation itself. In the beginning, they taught divine light was poured into vessels meant to hold it. But the light was too vast, too full, and the vessels shattered. Sparks of that original light scattered into everything that exists, into every object, every person, every fragment of the broken world. This shattering is called Shevirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, and the human task that follows from it in Hasidic teaching is called Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. Not by recreating some imagined unbroken past, by gathering the scattered sparks one act of care at a time and letting brokenness become the very material repair is made from. A Hasidic teacher once said that there is nothing so whole as a broken heart that has been mended. Not a heart pretending it was never broken. A heart that knows its own seams and has let them become part of how it loves. The potter in our story discovered something the Hasidic masters had taught for centuries, that the crack is not evidence the vessel failed. The crack is where the light gets back out. Think about something you have been protecting the way the potter protected his bowl. Not a physical object necessarily. Perhaps a version of a relationship that no longer exists in quite that form. Perhaps a version of yourself, younger, less tired, less changed by what has happened since. You may have felt this yourself, the quiet exhaustion of guarding something against the natural fact of its own changing. The energy it takes to insist that a thing remain exactly as it was when you first valued it. This shows up in ordinary life in the small refusals. The refusal to update an old story about someone. The refusal to let a finished chapter actually finish. The refusal to admit that the bowl has already cracked and that the cracking is not the end of its usefulness. It also shows up in the particular tiredness of vigilance, the bracing the potter carried for 20 years without naming it. You may know this tiredness. The part of you that stays half alert, even in rest, guarding something against a future it cannot actually control. What would it feel like to let the crack be visible? To stop spending your strength on the appearance of wholeness and let whatever is true, gold seams and all, simply be seen. But right now, in this breath, nothing in you needs to be protected from its own history. Whatever has broken in you has likely already been carrying gold in its lines, waiting for you to notice. You do not have to keep dusting that one shelf so carefully. You are allowed tonight to set the duty down. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Of all the images in the Tao Te Ching, the most beloved is water. Lao Tzu returns to it again and again. He says that the highest good is like water. Water benefits 10,000 things and does not compete. It goes to the places that people disdain, the low places, the forgotten places, and it does its work there. He says that water is soft. It is yielding. It does not argue with the stone, and yet given enough time, water wears the stone away completely. Not through force, through presence, through the patient, persistent nature of something that knows what it is and simply continues. This is one of the most radical ideas in human thought, that the soft thing outlasts the hard thing, that the yielding thing reshapes the world more profoundly than the rigid thing, that persistence and force are not the same. Tonight's fifth teaching is water, not as a symbol, as a model, something to feel rather than to understand, how it moves, why it moves that way, what we might learn, not by imitating it, but by discovering that we were always, already, more like water than like stone. Your own body is, after all, mostly water. Perhaps that is not only chemistry, perhaps it is also instruction. There was an old woman who lived beside a river for all of her life. She had watched it every season. She knew its different moods, the spring flooding that turned it brown and fast and almost angry, the summer gentleness when children waded in the shallows, the winter silence when ice crept across the surface and the river seemed to stop. But she knew it did not stop. Even under the ice, the water moved. She had buried a husband by that river, and raised children by it, and grown old beside it, and in all that time she had never once seen it truly stand still. Even in the deepest freeze, something underneath kept going. One winter, a young monk came to her village to study and to beg for food. He was a serious young man. He was earnest in his practice. He sat very straight. He breathed very carefully. He had read many texts about the nature of mind, and he wanted to understand. He came to the old woman because the villagers said she was wise. "Tell me," he said, "how does one achieve stillness of mind?" The old woman looked at him for a long moment. "Come," she said. She led him down to the river. It was deep winter. The surface was ice. They stood together, looking at the frozen river. "The river has achieved stillness," the young monk said. He was pleased with himself for noticing. The old woman said nothing. She picked up a small stone and placed it on the ice. The stone slid and came to rest. "The stillness is on top," she said at last. "Underneath, the river is still moving." The young monk looked at the ice for a long time. "I have been trying to freeze my mind," he said at last. "Yes," she said, "I could tell. But the stillness at the surface, is that false stillness?" "I would not say false," she said, "but I would say incomplete. The mind that does not move at all is not still. It is frozen. And frozen things cannot respond, cannot nourish, cannot find their way. Then what is true stillness?" he asked. She looked at the river for a while, before answering. "True stillness is moving clearly," she said at last. "It is the river in summer. Nothing on the surface disturbs it, but the current is strong and alive and knows where it is going." The young monk sat on the riverbank for a very long time. When he finally stood up, she could see something had shifted in him. He still held himself with care, but the carefulness was different now, less effortful, more natural. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank the river." He smiled. For the first time since he had arrived in the village, he smiled like a person who was not performing wisdom. Spring came. The ice broke. The river moved again in its full and unhurried way. The young monk stayed the whole summer. He still sat in meditation every morning, but he stopped trying to freeze the surface. He started trying to know the current. When he finally left, he left quietly, without announcing his departure, like water finding a new channel. Smoothly, without fuss, the old woman watched him go. "Good," she said, to no one in particular. She lived by that river for many more years, watching other travellers arrive with the same tightly held question in their eyes, and she found each time that the river was a better teacher than she was. She only ever pointed. Japanese Zen tradition, there is a teaching about this very thing. The Japanese call it mushin, which means literally no mind. But it does not mean an empty or absent mind. It means a mind that is not stuck, a mind that flows from moment to moment without clinging to any one of them. A swordsman with mushin does not think about the next move while making the current one. A calligrapher with mushin does not think about the stroke that just failed while making the one that is here. The mind moves like, the teachers say, like a mirror. It reflects what is in front of it completely. And when that thing passes, the mirror is clear again, not holding, not clinging, not frozen. There is a famous Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The actions are the same. What changes is the quality of presence within them. The water carried without thought of carrying. The wood chopped without thought of the chopper. This is what the old woman by the river was showing the young monk. Not the absence of movement, the rightness of movement. The clarity that comes not from freezing, but from flowing. There is another teaching, sometimes attributed to the same lineage. A flower falls, even though we love it. A weed grows, even though we do not love it. The world simply moves. Mushin is the willingness to move with it rather than constantly bracing against its current. You may have felt this yourself when you were so absorbed in something that you forgot to be the person doing it. Not lost, not careless, absorbed, present, moving so naturally in what you were doing that the doing and the doer were, for a moment, the same thing. Athletes call it being in the zone. Musicians call it being in the groove. Mystics call it many different names, but the feeling is always the same. Effortless effort. Movement without friction. Think about a moment when you felt that. When something flowed through you rather than from you. When the doing was easy because you were not in the way of it. This shows up in ordinary life, not only in extraordinary moments. It shows up in a simple conversation when you stop preparing your next sentence and simply listen. In a walk, when you stop planning the route and simply go. In a meal, when you stop thinking about eating and simply taste. Right now, in this moment, your body knows how to breathe without being instructed. Your heart knows how to beat without your help. Your blood moves in the dark without a thought from you. You are water. You already are. You have always been. The only question is whether you trusted enough to stop swimming and let yourself float. Right now, you do not have to swim toward anything. You can simply notice that you are already held. The water has always known how to carry you. It was only ever your own thrashing that made it feel otherwise. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Here we arrive at one of the most startling ideas in all of the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu speaks of something he calls Wu Wei. The word is sometimes translated as effortless action, sometimes as non-doing, sometimes simply as the way of not forcing. Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of effortless action, of moving with the natural current of things rather than against it. This does not mean laziness. It does not mean passivity. It does not mean sitting still while the world moves around you. A great teacher does not shout instructions. They create conditions in which learning becomes inevitable. A great gardener does not argue with the soil. They listen to what the soil wants to grow. A great leader, in the Taoist understanding, governs so well that the people say they did it themselves. Wu Wei is not the absence of action. It is the absence of unnecessary action. The stripping away of all the things we do to prove we are doing something. What remains, what has always been there beneath the proving, is the real action, clean, necessary, right. This is the hardest of all the teachings to practice, because so much of what we call effort is actually performance. Effort aimed not at the problem, but at being seen to address the problem. There was a physician in an ancient city who was said to have lost only 3 patients in 40 years. People asked him constantly what his secret was. He refused to call it a secret. "I simply follow the body," he said. "The body almost always knows what it needs." Other physicians in the city mistrusted him a little for this. They prescribed elaborate treatments, elaborate diets, elaborate rituals of cure. He often prescribed almost nothing at all, and yet his patients lived. He had a young apprentice who was very eager, very smart, very full of ideas about how to improve things. One morning, they visited a patient together. A man with a persistent cough that other physicians had treated with many remedies, none of which had helped. The apprentice examined the man and came away with 5 suggestions. He presented them to the physician quietly in the corridor. The physician listened carefully. "All reasonable," he said. "But wait. Wait for what?" "Wait and watch," the physician said. They went back in. The physician sat beside the patient. He said almost nothing. He watched the man breathe. He watched how he held his shoulders. He watched where his hands went when he wasn't thinking about them. He noticed that the man's window faced a courtyard where a kiln was burning. He noticed the line of ash on the window ledge. "What do you do for work?" the physician asked. The man told him. He worked next to the kiln. The physician nodded slowly. He went back to the corridor. "I have one suggestion," he said to the apprentice. "Ask the man's employer to let him work in the outer room for 2 months." The apprentice stared. "That's it?" The apprentice thought this was too simple, too small, not enough action for the complexity of the problem. 2 months later, the cough was gone. "How did you know?" the apprentice asked. "I didn't know," the physician said. "I listened until the answer appeared." "But that seems like nothing," the apprentice said. "You barely did anything." The physician smiled. "I did exactly what was needed," he said. "Not one thing more, not one thing less." He paused. "The difficult part is not doing less. The difficult part is knowing what to leave out." The apprentice thought about this for a long time. He was a very good physician eventually. He was not as good as his teacher. He always suspected it was because he found it slightly easier to prescribe than to wait, to act than to listen. He wrote this down and kept it above his desk for the rest of his life. The difficult part is knowing what to leave out. Many years later, when he had apprentices of his own, he would take them to the same corridor where he had once stood, frustrated and confused, and tell them the story of the cough and the kiln. Most of them, he noticed, made the same mistake he once had. It seemed to be a mistake every generation needed to make once, before the lesson could finally be kept. In the Celtic wisdom tradition of pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland, there is a concept known in Irish as thin places. A thin place is a location, or a moment, where the boundary between the ordinary world and something deeper becomes permeable, where the veil, as the Celts called it, grows thin. What the Celtic tradition recognized is that these thin places could not be manufactured. They could not be forced. They could not be achieved through effort. They could only be recognized and entered. A pilgrim might walk to a thin place, might sit quietly there, might wait, not for anything in particular, not with a list of demands or a set of intentions, but with a quality of openness, a kind of wu-wei, though they would not have used that word. The Celts understood that some things come to us only when we stop announcing our arrival, when we sit quietly at the edge of the water, when we stop being the most important thing in the landscape. There is a Celtic saying, very old, that goes something like this: "If you want the deer to come near, stop looking for the deer." This is not passivity. It is the wisdom of the physician, of the Taoist teacher, of the woman beside the river. It is the understanding that the deepest things are not taken, they are received. Many of these thin places in the old Celtic understanding were not dramatic at all. A particular bend in a stream, a particular hollow in a hillside, ordinary, easily overlooked places that simply happened to be quiet enough for something larger to be noticed. Think about a moment when you stopped trying and something arrived. The solution that came to you in the shower. The decision that became clear during a walk. The creative idea that surfaced at the edge of sleep, in that gentle place between waking and dreaming, when you were no longer reaching for it. You may have felt this yourself when you realized that most of your best insights arrived not during your hardest thinking, but in the moments after you gave up on thinking. This shows up in ordinary life in the moments of release, the sigh that ends a long period of tension, the laugh that breaks open a long sadness, the deep exhale of the person who has finally stopped pretending. Wu Wei is not for monks in mountains. It is for every person who has ever exhausted themselves pushing against something that did not need to be pushed. Right now, in this breath, there is nothing to push, nothing to figure out, nothing to resolve or achieve or move toward. Right now, the only thing happening is this: a voice and a breath and a body that already knows how to rest. You do not have to do anything to rest. Resting is not doing. It is the art of not doing. You are already there, right now, in this moment. Let the doing go. It will be there when morning comes. For now, there is only this thin place, this quiet bend in the evening, where nothing is required of you at all. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu had a word for the fundamental movement of the universe. He called it fu, the return, the going back. He observed that everything in nature moves in circles. The river reaches the sea and rises again as cloud. The day exhausts itself into night and rises again as dawn. The tree grows from a seed. The seed falls from the tree. Something dies. Something is fed by the dying. Something grows. In this cycling, Lao Tzu saw something we in the modern world often struggle to feel, that what seems like an ending is very rarely an ending. It is a return to something earlier and more essential, a return to the root. He wrote, returning to the root is called stillness. Stillness is called returning to one's destiny. Tonight's seventh teaching is about this returning, not the return to something you have lost, the return to something you have always been. Beneath the roles and the names and the accumulated history of a whole life, something what has not changed. Something that did not begin at your birth and will not end at your death. That something is the root. And tonight, without any effort at all, you are already returning to it. You do not need to search for it the way you might search for a lost object. The root does not hide. It only waits patiently beneath whatever noise has been laid over it. There was a woman who had been many things in her life. She had been a daughter, a student, a wife, a mother, a worker, a leader, a widow. Now she was old. Her children were grown and scattered. Her husband had been dead for many years. She had retired from the work that had structured her days for decades. She found to her surprise that she did not know who she was without these roles. This frightened her more than she let on, even to herself. She had always been the one others came to for steadiness. Now she found she had nothing solid to offer, even her own evenings. She sat in her chair in the evenings and felt a strange hollowness. Not sadness exactly, not loneliness, something more unsettling. She felt like a stage set that the actors had left, all the furniture in the right places, but no one playing the parts. A neighbour, a much older woman, nearly 90, came to visit one evening. They sat together with tea. "I've lost myself," the woman said at last, simply because she could not think of any other way to put it. The old neighbour looked at her for a long moment. "What do you think you've lost?" she asked. "All the things I used to be," the woman said. "I used to know what I was." "What were you?" the neighbour asked. "Useful," the woman said, and she heard as she said it how sad the word was. The neighbour was quiet for a while. "I used to be afraid of that feeling," the neighbour said at last, "when I was your age. When all my roles were ending one by one, I thought I was disappearing." She paused. "But I was wrong. What was happening?" the woman asked. "I was becoming invisible," the neighbour said. The woman did not understand. The neighbour saw this. "Think of it this way," she said. "You spent your whole life filling pages, beautiful pages, important pages, but the pages are not the book. The book is the thing that holds the pages." The woman was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the light was fading. The birds had gone quiet. The street was emptying. "And what is the book?" the woman asked at last. The neighbour smiled. "That is what you are about to find out." The woman sat with that for many evenings afterward. And slowly, over months and then years, she began to discover something she could not quite name, a kind of companionship with herself that she had never had before. Not because she had been lonely before, she had been very surrounded, very busy, very beloved. But she had never simply been alone with what she was, underneath everything. She began to find that she enjoyed the stillness, not as a consolation for what had been lost, as something in its own right, something she was surprised to find she recognized, as if she had been here before the roles, before the names, before the story began. She started calling this feeling her root. She did not tell many people about it. It was too simple to explain without sounding strange, but she smiled more, and people noticed. And when they asked what she had found in her old age, she thought of the neighbour. "I became visible," she always said. Years later, when she herself was the much older woman, nearly 90, she found herself sitting across from a younger neighbour who said almost word for word the same thing she had once said. "I've lost myself." And she found that she knew exactly what to say back, as though the words had been waiting in her the whole time, patient as the root itself. In the African philosophy of Ubuntu, there is a teaching that comes from a very different direction, but arrives at a similar truth. Ubuntu is often translated as, "I am because we are." It is the understanding that the individual self does not exist apart from the community, that who you are is, in some deep sense, a reflection of all the relationships that have made you. But there is a deeper dimension of Ubuntu that is sometimes missed in translation. Ubuntu also points to the understanding that beneath the individual self, beneath even the relational self, there is something that cannot be taken away by loss, a ground of being that the community recognizes in each person, something that was there before the roles began and will remain when they are finished. The Zulu concept of isithunzi, sometimes translated as presence, sometimes as dignity, points to this quality. It is not earned through achievement. It is not lost through failure. It is recognized by elders who have lived long enough to see through the surface of things, by children who have not yet learned to look anywhere else. The woman in our story found her isithunzi when she stopped filling pages. Ubuntu teaches that the community holds this quality for you, honors it, recognizes it, even when you cannot see it in yourself. Tonight you are held in that recognition. You do not have to be useful. You do not have to be performing. You are already the thing that holds the pages. In many Ubuntu-influenced communities, elders are approached not for what they can still produce, but for what they have become through the accumulated weight of simply having lived. Their value does not decline as their activity does. If anything, it deepens. Think about who you were at 5 years old, before the roles and the names, before the first report card, before you learned what was expected of you, before you knew how to be impressive, or responsible, or difficult, or easy, or whatever it is you learned to be. There was something there, some particular quality, something that was simply and unmistakably you. You may have felt this yourself when someone who loved you, really loved you, with no agenda, looked at you and simply smiled. Not because you had done something right, just because you were there. That quality has not gone anywhere. It did not leave when life got complicated. It did not diminish when you made mistakes, or when the roles changed, or when things fell apart. It is the root. It is there whether you can feel it or not. It is there especially when everything else has been stripped away. This shows up in ordinary life, in the moments when we catch ourselves simply being, not doing, not performing, just here. Right now, in this breath, you are at the root, not the mother or the father or the worker or the warrior, not the success or the failure, not the person with the plan or the person who lost the plan. Just this, just here. Just the quiet fact of being present in this moment. Something deeper, something quieter, something that has been here all along. No role is required of you right now, not even the role of someone trying to relax. Just the root, just this. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. There is an understanding among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth that the land itself remembers the way. Among Aboriginal peoples of Australia, there are paths that cross the continent, not roads, not marked trails, but routes known as songlines. Each songline follows the journey of an ancestral being from the time long ago, the time sometimes translated as the dreaming. A person walking a songline does not navigate by map, they navigate by song. The song describes the landscape, this rock, this waterhole, this bend in the dry riverbed, in such precise and musical detail that a traveller who knows the song can follow it across hundreds of miles of country they have never seen, simply by singing. The song does not tell you where to go. The song already knows. You simply have to remember it, or be willing to be taught it, and then walk. This is close to something Lao Tzu wrote, very far away and very long ago, in a different language about a different landscape. That the way is not found. It is already there, beneath the walking. Tonight's teaching is this. Somewhere in you, there is a song that already knows the way home. You do not need to invent the path. You only need to remember the singing. There was a young man who had grown up in a great city, far from the country of his grandmother's people. He had heard, as a child, fragments of stories about his grandmother's homeland. A vast red country, dry riverbeds, a particular hill shaped like a sleeping animal. But he had never been there. The stories had thinned with distance and time, the way stories do when no one is left close enough to the land to keep singing them properly. He grew up feeling, without quite knowing why, that something in him was facing the wrong direction. He could not have named it. It showed itself only as a kind of restlessness on certain evenings, a feeling of being slightly unanchored in a city that had never quite settled into feeling like home, despite his having lived there his whole life. When his grandmother grew old, she asked to be taken home one last time, to die in the country she had been born to. The young man travelled with her. It took many days. The roads gave out long before the journey ended, and they continued by a track that seemed to him indistinguishable from the surrounding scrub in every direction. His grandmother did not look at a map. She did not hesitate at any of the countless points where the track forked or disappeared entirely into stone and spinifex. She simply began to sing. It was a low song, almost a murmur, the words unfamiliar to him, but as she sang she would gesture. There, that ridge, there, the place where the water sits even in the dry season, there, the hill shaped like the sleeping animal from her stories, exactly as she had described it 60 years before, in a city thousands of miles from where it stood. "Have you know which way to go?" he finally asked her, on the third day, when the land had become so featureless to his eyes that he felt a kind of quiet panic. She did not stop walking. "I am not finding the way," she said. "The way is already here. I'm only remembering it." "But you haven't been here in 60 years. She smiled, the way the elders in old stories always seem to smile before they say something that changes everything. "The land does not forget," she said. And the song does not forget. I only had to stop assuming I needed to invent something that was already complete. He thought about that for a long while as they walked. He thought about all the years he had spent in the city trying to build a sense of direction out of plans and decisions and careful reasoning. The way you might try to construct a path with no ground beneath it. I don't think I have ever trusted anything the way you trust this song, he admitted. You have, she said. You simply called it by other names. A feeling in your stomach before you said yes to something, a heaviness before you said yes to something else, when you should have said no. That is the same song in a smaller country. You have always had it. You have only sometimes refused to listen. They reached the hill on the 5th day. It was exactly as she had sung it. The young man stood at its base and felt something he could not explain. Not recognition exactly, because he had never been there, but something close to it. A kind of homesickness for a place he was visiting for the first time. His grandmother sat at the base of the hill and grew very quiet. "This is the place," she said. "How do you know?" "The song stops here," she said simply. "When the song stops, you have arrived." She died there several weeks later, in the country her own grandmother had sung her toward when she herself was a child, in a chain of singing that stretched back further than anyone could count. The young man stayed for a season afterward. He did not know the full song, only the fragments he had walked alongside her. But in the quiet evenings, sitting near the hill, he found himself humming what he remembered. Not performing it, just letting it move through him, the way it had moved through her. He began to understand that the song was not a possession. It was a relationship, something you were inside of, not something you owned. When he finally returned to the city, he carried the fragments with him, not as a complete map, as a kind of compass that did not point north, but pointed toward something steadier than north, a direction that had been waiting in him the whole time, beneath the noise of the city, beneath the years of not knowing it was there. In the wayfinding traditions of Polynesian navigators, there is a teaching that speaks to this same buried knowing. For thousands of years, Pacific Islander navigators crossed vast stretches of open ocean, thousands of miles between islands too small and too distant to see from one another. Without compass, without chart, without any instrument we would recognize today. They navigated by a discipline sometimes called wayfinding. The navigator memorized the rising and setting points of stars, the pattern of ocean swells against the hull, the behavior of certain birds, the particular color underside of clouds reflecting a lagoon many miles before land was visible. All of this was held not as separate facts, but as a single living relationship with the ocean, something closer to a song than a set of instructions. A master navigator did not consult this knowledge. They felt it. The wayfinder is taught to hold the island's location in the body, not the mind, to sense, even in darkness, even in storm, a kind of pull toward where the island waits. This is very close to what the grandmother understood about her songline. She was not finding her way to the hill. She was remembering a relationship with the land that had never actually been broken, only quieted by 60 years of distance. You, too, carry something like this. a way of sensing direction that does not depend on seeing the destination, not something you must build from nothing, something you are only being invited gently to trust. Think about a time when you arrived somewhere, a place, a decision, a relationship, a piece of work, and felt, despite never having been there before, a strange sense of having come home. You may have felt this yourself, the job that felt right within the first hour, though you could not say why. The stranger who felt instantly familiar. The piece of music that seemed to know something about you before you had finished hearing it. This shows up in ordinary life whenever you stop overriding your own quiet knowing with someone else's map. When you let the song that is already in you do the navigating, rather than insisting on calculating every step from the outside. Think, too, about the times you ignored that knowing, the decision you talked yourself into against a quiet, steady pull in the other direction, the relationship you stayed in or left, long after some part of you had already sung the answer and you had simply stopped listening. This is not a teaching about always trusting every impulse. It is a teaching about the difference between the loud, anxious voice that calculates and the quieter, steadier one that already knows. The grandmother's song was not loud. It was barely a murmur, but it never once led her astray. You do not need to invent the way forward through your life. Some part of you has been singing it quietly the entire time, beneath the noise of obligation, beneath the static of other people's expectations, beneath the years it sometimes takes to grow quiet enough to hear it. Right now, in this breath, you do not have to search for anything. You only have to stop drowning out the song that has never actually stopped. Let it hum, faintly, beneath this moment. You do not need to understand the words. You only need to let it be there. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel. Just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. There is a paradox at the heart of the Tao Te Ching. It is this: the more you try to hold on to something, the more surely you lose it. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not accumulate. The more they do for others, the more they have. The more they give, the more they possess. This sounds like poetry. But it is, in truth, a very precise observation about how life actually works. When we hold on too tightly to an identity, a relationship, a way of seeing things, we stop being able to respond to how things actually are. We are responding to a fixed image of what we believe things to be. The parent who holds their grown child in the image of the 5-year-old cannot really see who that child has become. The person who holds themselves in the image of their worst moment cannot really begin to move. Letting go is not abandoning. It is releasing the fixed image so that you can see clearly. It is the courage to be surprised by what is actually here, right now, not in the story you have been telling about it. Tonight's 8th teaching is the wisdom of letting go. Not of the things you love, of the grip that prevents you from truly holding them. A hand closed too tightly around something cannot feel its true shape. Only an open hand can actually touch what it holds. There was a man who had carried a stone for 40 years. He had picked it up when he was young. It was a beautiful stone, heavy and cool and perfectly smooth. He had carried it because, when he first found it, it had comforted him. He was going through a difficult time, and the weight of the stone in his hand had felt, somehow, stabilizing. He had carried it so long he had forgotten he was carrying it. It had simply become part of how he walked. A slight list to one side, a particular way of swinging his free arm to compensate for the weight of the other. People who had known him for years had stopped noticing it entirely, the way you stop noticing a clock ticking in a familiar room. One day he was walking through the hills when he came across an old man sitting by the side of the path. The old man was watching him with what seemed like curiosity. "You look tired," the old man said. "I am tired," the man agreed. "I have been walking a long time." "What are you carrying?" the old man asked. The man looked down. He had not thought about the stone in years. He held it up, surprised. "A stone," he said. "Why are you carrying it?" The man thought about this. He had not thought about it in a very long time. "When I first picked it up," he said slowly, "I was in a great deal of pain, and somehow holding this helped." "Does it still help?" the old man asked. The man considered the stone. It was smooth and familiar in his palm, but it was very heavy. "I think," he said carefully, "that I forgot I was carrying it." "Why not put it down?" the old man asked. The man felt something tighten in his chest. "It feels like if I put it down—" He stopped. "Yes?" the old man said quietly. "It feels like I would be putting down the time when I first picked it up, and the person I was then, and all the years since." The old man was quiet for a moment. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked. "To put down 40 years of carrying?" The man stood very still. He looked at the stone. It was just a stone, a beautiful one, but a stone. He thought about the person he had been when he picked it up, young, in pain, looking for something solid to hold. He felt a great tenderness for that person, and then carefully he set the stone down on the path beside the old man. He straightened up. He rolled his shoulder. He felt strange, lighter, almost frighteningly light. "I feel like something is missing," he said. "Something is missing," the old man said, "but not something you needed." The man stood on the path for a long time. He looked at the stone on the ground. He did not pick it up. "What about the years of carrying?" he asked at last. "Were they wasted?" The old man shook his head. "The stone carried you too," he said. "In its way, it was company. It was continuity. It connected you to the young person you were." He paused. "But you have kept that connection. It is in you now. You don't need to carry the weight anymore." The man walked on. He was lighter for the rest of the afternoon, and then for the rest of the days that followed. And then it became simply how he was. He forgot what it had been like to carry the stone, except sometimes, on a cold morning or when he saw someone young and in pain, he felt the weight of it in his hand. Just for a moment, a memory of the stone, and he felt each time that same tenderness for the young person who had picked it up. And then the memory passed, and he walked on. He told the story in his own old age to a young woman he met on a different road, carrying a different kind of weight entirely. He did not tell her what to set down. He only asked her gently what she was carrying, and let the question do the rest of the work. In the Mayan cosmological tradition, there is a deep understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear. The ancient Maya did not experience time as a long corridor stretching from past to future. They experienced it as a wheel, everything returning, everything letting go so that it could begin again. In the Mayan calendar, the end of a great cycle, a period they called a baktun, lasting many hundreds of years, was not a catastrophe. It was a release, a letting go of one age so that another could begin. The Mayan priests did not mourn the ending of cycles. They honored them. They gave thanks for what had been carried through the cycle. And then they released it, formally, ritually, with intention. This is a profoundly different relationship with endings than the one many of us were taught. What if every ending was a release? What if the things that concluded, the chapter, the relationship, the identity, the version of ourselves we used to be, were honored for what they carried us through, and then set gently on the path beside us, as the man set down his stone? The Mayan teacher might ask, what cycle is ending for you right now? What have you carried long enough? What is ready to be honored and released so that the new cycle can have room to begin? Tonight, right now, the day is ending. You have carried it long enough. You can set it down. There is a Mayan ceremonial practice still observed in some communities of writing down what one wishes to release at the close of a cycle and burning the paper as an offering. The act itself is simple. What matters is the willingness behind it, the decision that an ending may be honored rather than merely endured. Think about something you are still carrying, not a physical thing, a thought, a version of something, an interpretation. An old hurt that has become so familiar you have forgotten it is there. A way of seeing yourself that may have once been true, but may no longer be. You may have felt this yourself, the way certain stories about who we are become invisible to us precisely because we have carried them so long. We stop questioning them. We simply are them. This shows up in ordinary life when the old story causes more friction than the actual situation does, when the interpretation of a thing is more painful than the thing itself. The stone was not causing the man pain, the carrying was. Right now, in this moment, you do not have to identify every stone you are carrying. You do not have to do an inventory or make a plan. You only have to notice that your hands are, right now, capable of opening. That is all. Just the opening of the hands. The grip loosens, the heaviness lifts, the mind grows still. Something you did not know you were holding quietly leaves. And there is more room now, right here. In this breath, you do not have to know exactly what just left. You only have to notice that you feel, somehow, a little less burdened than you did a few minutes ago. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. The very last chapter of the Tao Te Ching contains a sentence that has puzzled and delighted readers for thousands of years. Lao Tzu writes, "The sage does not compete, and therefore no one can compete with the sage." He is not talking about strategy. He is not giving advice for how to win. He is pointing to something much more radical. The freedom of the person who has stopped needing anything to be other than what it is, who has stopped measuring themselves against what they are not, who has arrived fully and completely in the place they already are. This is not resignation. It is not lowering of expectations. It is something closer to the opposite. The person who is fully present, who is not somewhere else in their mind, calculating and comparing, is the most capable of seeing clearly and responding wisely. They are not dulled by disappointment or inflated by ambition. They are just here. And here is where everything actually happens. Tonight's final teaching is this: you are already home. Not after you have rested enough, not after you have figured out enough, right now, in this breath, in this moment. This is it. You are already where you are trying to get to. This is perhaps the strangest teaching of all 11 chapters tonight. Not because it is complicated, because it is so simple that the mind, trained for a lifetime to search, has trouble believing it. There was a traveler who had been searching for a great city. He had heard of it all his life, a city, it was said, of extraordinary beauty, a place of perfect peace, where the air was clear and the light was gentle, and everything somehow was as it should be. He had been searching for 30 years. He had given up a great deal for the search. A trade he might have learned, a family he might have raised. He told himself on the difficult nights that the city would make all of it worthwhile once he finally found it. He had visited many cities. Some were beautiful, some were peaceful, but none of them were the city. He always felt, after a few weeks, that it was somewhere else. Slightly over the next horizon, he continued. He was an old man now. He was walking along a road he had not walked before, through a landscape he did not recognize, when he came upon a young girl sitting on a wall at the edge of a village. "Excuse me," he said, "I'm looking for the great city, the city of peace and beauty. Do you know which way it is?" The girl looked at him for a long moment. "The great city?" she said. "Yes," he said, "the one they say is the most beautiful place in the world." She considered this. "I have heard of it," she said, "but I have never felt the need to go there." "Why not?" he asked, surprised. "Because I like it here," she said simply. He looked around. It was a small village, modest, ordinary, a few houses, some trees, the sound of water nearby. "But it is nothing special," he said, not unkindly. "Isn't it?" she said. He looked again. There was an old tree at the corner, its roots lifting the stones of the road slightly. There was smoke rising from one of the houses, a dog asleep in the sun, the sound, now that he listened, of a stream running somewhere close. "The great city," the girl said, "is the place that seems ordinary until you stop to look." He stood in the road for a long moment. "I have been looking for 30 years," he said. "I know. she said. She did not say it unkindly. Where do I go? He asked. It came out smaller than he intended. Nowhere, she said. Just look. He looked at the tree, the smoke, the dog, the drowsy afternoon light falling across the road. He had seen these things 1,000 times in 1,000 villages. But today, perhaps because he was tired, perhaps because he had stopped being in a hurry, perhaps simply because a child had asked him to look, he saw them differently. There was something in the quality of the light, something in the sound of the stream, something in the air of this ordinary, unremarkable, absolutely present moment. He sat down on the wall beside the girl. "Is this it?" he asked. "Is this the great city?" She smiled. "I told you," she said. "I've heard of it, but I've never needed to go there." He understood finally. He sat on the wall for the rest of the afternoon. He watched the light change. He heard the stream. He felt the warmth of the sun. He was very tired. And the tiredness, somehow, had become comfortable. The way tiredness feels when you have finally arrived somewhere. He did not know if he would find the city the stories spoke of. He thought now that perhaps the stories and the city were two different things. But he had found something. He stayed in the village for the rest of his life. Not because he gave up on the search, because the search finally had given up on him. And in the space it left, something much simpler had moved in. He called it home. Travelers passed through that village for the rest of his life, many of them searching for the very same great city he had once searched for. He never told them to stop looking. He only ever asked gently the same question the girl had once asked him. Have you stopped to look at where you already are? In the Norse mythological tradition, there is a story about the world tree. It is called Yggdrasil, a great ash tree whose roots and branches connect all the worlds. The gods convene beneath it. The springs of wisdom and fate flow from its roots. The eagle perches at its crown, and the serpent gnaws at its roots, and the squirrel carries messages between them, up and down forever. What the Norse tradition understood about Yggdrasil is that it is not a destination. It is a center, and the center is not a specific place. It is a quality. It is the quality of being rooted. The traveler who has found the center of things has not arrived at an external city. They have arrived at an internal orientation. The stillness that is available in any place at any moment to the person who has stopped being pulled by the promise of somewhere else. In the Norse understanding, Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights to earn wisdom. Not the wisdom that comes from traveling far, the wisdom that comes from hanging in one place long enough that the ordinary becomes transparent, and what is always underneath it finally becomes visible. This is the wisdom of the traveler on the wall, the wisdom of the girl who had never needed to leave. The world tree is not far away. Its roots are under you right now. Its branches are wherever you are. You are already at its center. You have always been. The Norse storytellers said that Yggdrasil's roots reach into 3 different wells, drawing wisdom from realms most travelers never visit in a lifetime. And yet the tree itself never moves an inch. All the wisdom of the 9 worlds arrives at a single, unhurried, rooted place. Think about what you have been searching for tonight. Maybe sleep, maybe rest, maybe peace, maybe something you cannot quite name. A settling, a release, an arrival. You may have felt this yourself, the strange exhaustion of always being on the way to something, always 5 minutes, 5 months, 5 achievements from the place that will finally feel like enough. This shows up in ordinary life in the constant forward lean, the when this is over, and the once I have that, and the after this next thing settles. The life lived perpetually one moment ahead of the moment that is actually here. The traveller walked for 30 years, but home was always a village away. Right now, in this breath, you have stopped walking. You are not on the way to rest. You are not approaching sleep. You are here, in a body, in a room. In this exact moment, not the moment before this one, not the one coming next, this one. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to happen before this is enough. You are already home. You have been home this whole time. You simply forgot somewhere along the way to notice. Right now, in this moment, notice. Something deeper, something quieter, something that does not need to go anywhere. You are already there. You are already here. Let that be true. Let it settle. Let it be the last thought before the thoughts fade. There is nowhere left to walk to tonight. The road has already arrived. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight, we began with water. We began with the ancient question of what it might mean to stop fighting the current of your own life, to move not by force, but by following, to find not the path you decided upon, but the path that was waiting for you all along. And over these 11 chapters, we let that question open slowly from many different sides. We followed a young calligrapher to the riverbank and learned that the perfect stroke cannot be forced. We sat in the grandmother's empty house and found that the hollow places are not losses, but invitations. We stood in the garden with the bamboo after the storm and understood that the thing which bends is the thing which survives. We tasted the bread baked in full presence. We watched a potter set down a bowl he had protected for 20 years and learned that the crack is where the light gets back out. We watched the river move beneath the winter ice. We waited with the physician who knew what to leave out. We sat in the chair of the woman who discovered in her old age that she had become visible. We walked a song line with a grandmother who had never forgotten the way home. We set down a stone we had been carrying for 40 years, and we found a small village in the light of an ordinary afternoon that turned out to be everywhere. Now let us be clear about something. You are not your name. You are not your title or your role. You are not your worries or your plans. You are not the conversation you need to have tomorrow. You are not the thing that went wrong last week. You are not the list that is waiting for you when the morning comes. You are the awareness that has been listening to all of these stories. You are the stillness beneath the words. You are the quiet that was here before tonight began and will remain when this voice stops. You are the water, not the current in any particular moment, the water itself. Not the wave that rose and fell an hour ago, not the wave that has not yet arrived, the water beneath all the waves, which was never troubled by any of them. The central teaching of the Tao Te Ching, offered tonight in 11 quiet chapters, 11 different windows into the same room, is simply this. You do not need to force your way through your own life. The river does not argue with the stone. The willow does not command the wind to stop. Water does not chase the sea. And yet the river reaches the sea. The willow stands after the storm. Water shapes the world more completely than stone ever could. You are already moving in the right direction, even when it feels like stillness, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Especially then, you do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one moment stayed with you, one phrase, one feeling, let that be enough. Let it be a small stone in your pocket. Light, smooth, something to find later with your hands when you have forgotten you are carrying it. The river finds its way, always, even underground, even in winter beneath the ice. And so will you. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are, with whatever you are carrying and whatever you are ready to set down. Sleep well. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.